We've got some questions that we discussed prior or rose prior, but tell us, if you will, what is a biological dentist and why do we care about a biological dentist versus, you know, doc, Dr. DDS down the street?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that I get very frequently. So there's a lot that's the same about the what we do. So, yes, as a biological dentist, I still do fillings and crowns and dentures and all the normal dental things. We still do restorative work, but a lot of times the how we do it is very different. So, we stand by very, very strong values that there are certain materials and chemicals that are used in dentistry traditionally that have potential toxic effects.
Mhm.
And we're very careful with how we use them, if we use them, and how we dispose of them.
Yeah.
So the things that you're most likely to see are fluoride free practices. So I don't have any fluoride in my office at all. And then when we're handling those old silver fillings that so many of us got when we were kids, we handle those very carefully. I mean, there's there are very few dentists who still place them. So that's good. I think that's a step in the right direction. They are 50% mercury, but we handle them very, very in a very specific way. And that's that SMART certification that I mentioned in the beginning. It just stands for Safe Mercury Amalgam Removal Technique.
Mhm.
And that means that anytime we remove an amalgam filling, we actually will stir up some mercury.
Mhm.
And we don't want ourselves, our team members, our patients exposed to that mercury when we start drilling it out. And so
Mhm.
we have certain protections in place to make sure that that's done properly. There are lots of other things that a biological dentist may or may not do. But I think really the main issue is that we just uphold certain values. We really believe that dentistry should be safe. And
Mhm.
so we choose our materials very carefully and very intentionally. We have a strong, strong belief that prevention should come first.
Mhm.
And so I know a lot of us are very, very interested and passionate about a nutritious diet and making sure that our gut health is in good shape, that our nutrition is dialed in so that we can have healthier mouths.
Beautiful.
And then we also know that, like you mentioned before, that there is a direct correlation between oral health and overall health. You can't have one without the other. And so just appreciating that connection and making sure that nothing that's going on in my patients' mouths is going to impact what our practitioners like you are helping our patients achieve.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And I'm just thinking, the tissue in our mouths is so vulnerable, if you will. It's just so accessible to the bloodstream quickly, to the digestive system next, immediately down the
Yes.
tube, so to speak. So how could it not be? And how could our oral microbiome not be related to our digestive microbiome and our vaginal microbiome and our uterine microbiome? And we're seeing now a lot
Absolutely.
of infertility challenge. It is an inflammatory response in the uterine microbiome. So
Isn't that so
let's dive
fascinating?
in, shall we?
Yes, yes.
What would you say might be the link between someone, noticing, oh, when I brush on my floss or I floss, my gums are bleeding, and what might you say, you might want to look into how this is affecting your whole health and your fertile health?
So the correlation is direct. There's the Western medicine correlation, which I learned about first, and I'm assuming that's where you want to go with this. So we'll
Yeah,
go.
I'll
Okay.
go anywhere. This is a conversation and I think the listening viewers would go anywhere as well. They want to know the whole gamut, you
The
know.
whole gamut.
Mhm.
So, really what I learned first, just because as a young dentist, that's just where my interest took me first, is the increasing amount of peer-reviewed evidence that is linking the inflammatory process, linking bleeding gums, periodontal disease, it's just a fancy word for gum disease, linking that to all areas of reproductive health.
Mhm.
So it has an impact on fertility. It has an impact on pregnancy outcomes, on whether you can maintain a pregnancy. It impacts birth weight
Mhm.
of an infant. So just all of these Western medicine, these peer-reviewed evidences that a poor inflammatory response in the mouth is correlated with a poor inflammatory response elsewhere as
Okay.
well. But then the more I got into biological dentistry and the more I started working with naturopaths and Eastern medicine doctors and homeopaths, the more I discovered that, goodness gracious, there's a whole other connection that I learned nothing about in school. And so I'm guessing that probably your audience has at least heard of a meridian chart, and there are these energetic
Acupuncture would be.
connections.
Mhm.
And in my world, we look at a tooth meridian chart. And so
Mhm.
every tooth in the mouth is connected energetically to different organs and different parts of the body.
Fascinating. I did not know that. I was today years old to learn that
Mhm.
there's a tooth meridian system and that each tooth is connected. So given that this conversation, of course, I'd love to know which each tooth is connected to, but which teeth might be connected to our reproductive health? Are
Right in the front.
wow, interesting.
Right in the front. And we'll have to, man, if I could pull up a tooth meridian chart online, we'll go through like
You know
each
what?
one.
Perhaps there could even be a link that I could put in the show notes of that link
Absolutely.
to your tooth meridian chart that folks can look at and go, "Oh my goodness, that tooth? Ooh, and I'm having this
Yes.
problem. Yikes, I can
We
see the
can
correlation."
absolutely do that.
Mm.
And that what's funny is that that correlation goes both ways. So, yes, there could be an infection in a tooth where you're like, huh, when I fixed that tooth infection, my periods got more regular or my cramping lessened or things like that. But I actually had one case that was so fascinating to me is we had a patient who's in her 50s, middle age, perimenopause, but she came in because she's a regular patient of mine. I'd seen her for years, came in because she kept having pain in her gums around her lower front teeth.
Interesting.
And based on what she was describing to me, it made no sense. I couldn't see anything wrong clinically. Her her gums weren't even bleeding that much. Everything looked perfectly fine. Well, she came in, we did like some ozone and some laser stuff to help manage her symptoms while we tried to figure it out. She came back a couple of months later and she's like, and we were just catching up and she was telling me about her other issues.
Her gynecological issues.
Yes, she had been bleeding for 2 months straight, finally went in to be seen by a physician, and she had this terrible cyst on her uterus
Mm.
that had to be surgically removed, and wouldn't you know it, that once she got the uterine cyst taken care of, her mouth felt better, and she didn't have any of those symptoms in her mouth anymore.
Fascinating.
Isn't
That's
that so bizarre?
absolutely, absolutely. And what's also interesting to me, being a doctor of Chinese medicine and acupuncture, is that this section of the mouth, the front section of the mouth, does relate to our stomach and spleen, our digestive system. How well are we assimilating our nutrients and eliminating toxicity? So there you go.
Interesting. Interesting. Oh, that's so cool.
I love that. I love that when we can prove something that's always existed by
Yes.
virtue of our medicines and our science.
Yes. Yes. And it's so funny. There are lots of now pioneers in oral systemic health and the oral systemic connection.
Brilliant.
Chinese medicine and all of these ancient practices, they've known this for forever. And
Right.
we think we're so special because
Right,
we're
well, they were
just now
masters at
figuring it out.
observation, right? They, that's where their skill set was just supreme. They would observe, when this happens, that happens. When there's this change in the environment, be it just, change in season, something else occurs. Whereas we had then became a little bit fascinated with and enamored with our reductionist method of looking, and we forget to look at at the 30,000 feet level, or the 10-foot level, and see the whole body.
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely.
well, so conversely, so this woman had a cyst on her uterus, and it was showing up in her teeth. When a woman is going through, she doesn't have to be sort of in her perimenopausal phase, but she might be trying to conceive, and her hormones are fluctuating. How might that show up, and how might you see a change in her oral health based upon problems in her reproductive hormonal health?
Most often, it's an increase in bleeding gums, and that's very, very common. I see it almost on a daily basis.
Mhm.
And so if there's an increase in bleeding or even just any bleeding at all, your mouth shouldn't bleed.
Mhm.
It's, if you scraped your hand, or if your hand started bleeding without having scraped it, we would be concerned, right? Well, your mouth should be the same way.
Right.
So yes, absolutely. We see bleeding gums. Then we start looking further. The most common reason people have bleeding gums is plaque tartar buildup. So that's what we're looking for first in a normal checkup. But when that doesn't line up, if we've got bleeding gums and there's like no plaque, there's nothing to clean,
Mhm.
then we start asking questions. And one of the first questions that I'll ask is, hey, I know this is going to sound really weird, but do you know where you're at in your cycle? Are you about to start your period, or have you been having some issues with your cycling lately? And so they'll look at me funny first, and then they'll think about it for a little bit. And so, sure enough, sometimes they'll say, "Oh, yeah, I actually am going to start my period next week," and then that makes perfect sense.
Interesting.
Um, but yes, when things are out of balance hormonally, then we will definitely see an increase in bleeding.
I'm even wondering, just in the course of this conversation, if, for instance, if things are out of balance hormonally, might that not affect the composite of a person's, oh gosh, Tony, I think, oh my God.
Says it's recording.
So can you hear me differently now?
No, it sounds the
Okay,
same.
good. They will edit this. I was not
Okay.
plugged into my mic. I was on the regular
Oh,
computer. I just looked down and saw it unplugged.
no, it
The
sounded
podcast,
perfect.
okay, the podcast producers will make any adjustments and will cut out
Yeah.
my, oh my goodness. Thank goodness I didn't use any swear words. All right, so I will
Well, it
collect
might be more
myself.
entertaining if you did.
Exactly. And we will continue. But so I'm going to pick that question up. My question is, I'm thinking in terms of if there are changes to the hormones that are, out of balance, does that change the sort of the mineral composite of saliva that would then increase plaque production, that would then increase gum sensitivity? Or am I just taking this a little leap too far?
It's a great question. I
Mhm.
actually don't know the complete answer to
Okay.
that question. I know it will definitely change the bacterial makeup.
Hmm.
Any inflammatory markers that are in the saliva itself, it could
Hmm.
definitely change, but it makes perfect sense that it would change mineral content, that it might change those other factors too.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, great. Yes. So there
Yeah.
is a relationship in the reverse, that the hormonal changes will upstream, if you will, up to the
Yes.
mouth, show up not just as an inflammatory response, but it actually could be part of the saliva that is then, having an adverse effect. And probably what I would imagine, as I think aloud, you might see things like just changes in tongue coating or breath or thirst. Do you see a correlation between, for women who are sort of having menstrual issues or fertility issues, and those kinds of things that are not specific to their teeth or gums, but are specific to? biome in
kind
their
of their
mouth.
microbiome.
Mhm,
Yeah, absolutely. We will for sure see that difference.
mhm,
And you're exactly right. Changes that we would notice would be thirst, amount and quality of saliva, the amount and quality of any coating on the tongue and
mhm,
things of that nature. So you're spot on. You're
mhm.
spot on.
So here again, the Chinese medicine and biological dentistry both look at the coating of the tongue for an indicator. I love that.
Mhm.
I also I'm bouncing around a little bit, but toward pregnancy. Of course, everybody listening to this podcast also is, desiring to achieve pregnancy and have a healthy pregnancy. What might you advise if a woman is trying to conceive or is newly pregnant, that she look for, and forgive me, audience, I'm just going to use the pronoun she, um, that she look for to ensure that all is going well in her uterus?
So that's a great question, and it's one that makes me so glad every day that I work with integrative providers, because I can tell you I used to figuratively bang my head against the wall
Mm,
when I was trying to speak to MDs and speak to, more traditional OB-GYNs
mhm,
about how important it was for them to get their patients to a dentist. And I would even say, I don't care what dentist it is. It could be
mhm,
me, it could be my friend down the street,
mhm,
but absolutely get in to see a dentist to make sure the gums and the teeth are healthy as soon as possible.
mhm,
So, if I could encourage anything, I would say for members of your audience who are already pregnant, then yes, 100%, no matter where you are in your pregnancy, see a dentist as soon as you can. I think the sooner the better, because the sooner you go, the more we can pick up on these issues and time things if things need to be timed appropriately around baby. Um, but if you're able to, if you're not pregnant yet, then absolutely now's a perfect time
mhm.
to get these things in order and
Right.
see a dentist and get a game plan first before you even conceive. I think it's so, so important.
This
And
is
not only
beautiful.
does Eastern medicine support that, but Western medicine does now as well.
Mhm,
Because 100%, if you've got some underlying gum disease, whether you notice bleeding gums, notice bleeding in the sink when you brush your teeth or not, because sometimes it's sneaky and it's
mhm,
not very apparent until you
mhm.
go in and see someone.
Right. It could be
Um,
microscopic, but the inflammation is still there.
absolutely.
And what better time to get it when it's microscopic before it becomes persistent. Mhm,
Absolutely.
mm,
Absolutely. And we know that that can increase your likelihood of success at getting pregnant and
mhm.
staying pregnant, which is, I mean, what a gift that we could help patients achieve.
Absolutely. Preconception dentistry, I have never even heard of, and I admit, thought of that as an important component of preconception care.
Yeah.
A woman will go, get a mammogram or other kind of, breast, imaging to assure that as hormones go crazy as they do during pregnancy,
Yeah.
that there's no lesion there, that there's nothing to be, addressed before she has to wait 9 to 18 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
So similarly, if there's something that can be identified and addressed, and really, even if there's nothing, just that assurance and that clean mouth, what better way, what better way to begin your preconception journey than to know you're taking care of, the first area of invasion that likely occurs in a woman's body, a person's body.